He grabbed her wrist and dragged her toward the kitchen. No one moved, except the billionaire in the corner. He's been watching the whole time. Maria Reyes tied the strings of her apron with the same careful knot she'd tied every evening for the past 3 years. It wasn't fancy, just a double loop that stayed put even when she was rushing between tables, but it was reliable, like her. Outside, Chicago's October wind already carried the bite of winter, but inside La Trattoria, the air was warm with the smell of garlic, simmering tomatoes, and fresh-baked bread. The kind of warmth that made customers linger. But for Maria, it was just another part of the job. She didn't come here for comfort. She came to work. At 28, Maria had long stopped dreaming of grand escapes or sudden luck. Life had taught her that miracles were rare, but effort wasn't. Every shift started the same way. Drop her son Matteo off at her neighbor's apartment, Mrs. Gupta, who charged only what Maria could afford and sometimes slipped extra cookies into Matteo's lunchbox. Then catch the 4:15 bus downtown. She'd clock in by 5 p.m., change into her black slacks and white blouse, spend the next 6 hours balancing trays, refilling water glasses, smiling through comments she'd rather forget. Not because she liked it, but because rent was due. Matteo needed new shoes. The pediatrician had mentioned something about braces in a few years. Tonight felt heavier than usual. Her feet already ached from her morning shift at the laundromat, where she folded strangers' clothes for minimum wage. But she pushed the tiredness down. At La Trattoria, looking tired meant fewer tips, and fewer tips meant choosing between groceries and the electric bill. So she stood tall, smoothed her hair into a neat ponytail, and walked out onto the floor with her order pad ready. The restaurant was buzzing. Friday nights always were. Families celebrating birthdays, couples on dates, groups of coworkers unwinding after a long week. It was all here, under soft lighting and the gentle clink of wine glasses. Maria moved through it like a current, quick and quiet, knowing exactly when to appear and when to disappear. She remembered regulars' orders. Mr. Patel always wanted extra olives. The college students at table 12 never ordered dessert but always asked for extra bread, and she used that knowledge to make her tips stretch a little further. Then she saw him in the far corner booth. Tucked away like he didn't want to be noticed, sat a man in a dark gray suit. No tie, sleeves rolled just enough to show a simple silver watch. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't laughing loudly with friends. He was alone, reading papers with a half-finished glass of red wine beside him. Most customers like that either wanted to be left alone or were waiting for someone. Maria gave him a polite nod when she passed, but he didn't look up. She didn't mind. Some of the best tippers were the quiet ones. What she didn't know was that this man, Daniel Cho, was worth more than the entire block the restaurant sat on, that his name appeared on lists. Like most influential tech leaders and top philanthropists under 40, that he'd started his first company in a college dorm room with a borrowed laptop and ramen noodles. But tonight, none of that mattered. To Maria, he was just another customer. And to Daniel, Maria was just another face in a city of millions, until she wasn't. Back at her station, Maria checked her watch. Almost 7 p.m. Matteo would be finishing his homework by now, probably showing Mrs. Gupta his drawings of spaceships and dinosaurs. She allowed herself a small smile. That smile reel, not the practiced one she used for customers, was her secret fuel. It reminded her why she did all this. Not for herself, but for him. For the future where he wouldn't have to choose between dignity and survival. The front door swung open, and a loud group of men entered, laughing too loudly. Coats slung over their arms like they owned the place. Maria recognized the type instantly. Businessmen celebrating a closed deal? Probably. They took a large round table near the window, already ordering drinks before they'd even sat down. She approached with water glasses and menus, keeping her tone neutral. "Welcome to La Trattoria. Can I start you off with some wine or cocktails?" One of them, a man with slicked back hair and a gold watch that screamed. "I just got promoted," looked her up and down with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, hello there," he said, leaning forward. "You always this friendly?" Maria kept her expression pleasant but distant. "Just doing my job, sir." He chuckled, as if she'd said something clever. I like that. Hard worker. I respect that. Glanced at his friends, who smirked knowingly. Maria felt the familiar knot in her stomach, the one that told her this table might be trouble, but she didn't show it. She took their drink orders quickly and walked away, hoping they'd forget about her once the alcohol kicked in, but the man Gregory Vance, though she didn't know his name yet, didn't forget. Every time she passed, his eyes followed her. Once, he accidentally brushed her hand when she set down his whiskey. Another time, he asked if she had plans after work. She answered politely but firmly, just heading home to my son. That seemed to throw him off for a moment. But as the night wore on, and the drinks kept coming, his behavior grew bolder. Maria tried to stay busy elsewhere, refilling salt shakers, checking on other tables, even helping the busboy clear dishes. But the restaurant was full, and eventually, she had to return to table 7. That's when it happened. She was clearing empty plates, when Gregory suddenly reached out and grabbed her wrist. Not gently, not playfully. His fingers clamped down hard, pulling her toward him. Hey, where are you going? He slurred, his breath sharp with whiskey. We're not done talking. Maria froze. Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice calm. Please let go, sir. I need to get back to work. But he didn't let go. Instead, he yanked her closer, nearly spilling her tray. Come on, he said. Louder now, so others could hear. Be nice, you've been ignoring us all night. How about you join us for a drink? In the kitchen. It's quieter back there. He started pulling her toward the kitchen door. Maria stumbled, her eyes wide with panic. She tried to twist free, but his grip was iron. Around them, conversation slowed. A few customers glanced over. One waiter paused mid-step. But no one moved to help. No one said a word. From his corner booth, Daniel Cho looked up from his papers. He'd been watching the scene unfold without meaning to just part of the background noise of a busy restaurant. But now, something shifted. The way Maria's shoulders tensed. The fear in her eyes quickly masked by forced calm. The way the man held her like she was an object, not a person. Daniel set his pen down slowly. His jaw tightened. He didn't know Maria. He didn't owe her anything. But he remembered vividly what it felt like to be powerless. To be grabbed, pushed, told to know your place while working the night shift at a diner in San Jose years ago. Back then, no one had stepped in for him either. He didn't stand up yet, but he reached into his pocket, turned on his phone's camera, and began recording. Quietly, carefully, because if something bad was about to happen, someone needed to see it. Someone needed to remember. And in that moment, as Maria struggled against Gregory's grip and the restaurant held its breath, two lives so different in every way were about to collide in a way neither of them expected. Maria's wrist burned where Gregory's fingers dug in. It wasn't just the pressure, it was the shame, the sudden exposure. Like she'd been yanked out of the background and thrown under a spotlight she'd never asked for. Her tray clattered to the floor, glasses rattling but not breaking. A few heads turned fully now. Someone gasped. But still no one moved. Let go, she said again, firmer this time, trying to keep her voice steady even as her pulse roared in her ears. She planted her feet, resisting the pull toward the kitchen hallway. The kitchen wasn't just quieter, it was isolated. No customers. No witnesses. Just steam, clanging pans, and the narrow back exit. She knew that space too well. It was where staff took breaks, where arguments happened out of sight, where things could disappear before anyone noticed. Gregory laughed, a loud, sloppy sound that echoed off the tile walls. Oh, come on. Don't be like that. We're just having fun. He tugged harder, his other hand reaching for her elbow now, trying to steer her like she was a shopping cart. His friends at the table chuckled nervously, one of them muttering, "Dude, chill," but none of them stood up. None of them said, "Stop," Maria's mind raced. She thought of Mateo waiting at Mrs. Gupta's, probably wondering when Mama would come home. She thought of her manager, Mr. Rossi, who always said, "Keep the customers happy, no matter what." But this wasn't about service anymore. This was about safety. And she knew if she went back there with him, even for a minute, even if nothing happened, it would set a precedent. It would tell him, and everyone watching, that it was okay to treat her like this. No, she said, louder now, pulling back with all her strength. I'm not going anywhere with you. That's when Gregory's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. The friendly act dropped like a mask falling off. You think you can talk to me like that? He snapped, his voice low and sharp. After I've been tipping you all night? You should be grateful. Grateful. The word hit her like a slap. Grateful for what? For being stared at? For being touched without permission? For being treated like she existed only to serve his mood? She'd been grateful for real kindness, like when old Mrs. Delaney left an extra $20 because you looked tired. Dear, but this wasn't kindness. This was control. She twisted her arm hard, trying to break free. For a second, she almost did, but then he yanked her forward again, so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. Her shoulder slammed into the edge of a nearby table, knocking over a wine glass. Red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth. Like blood. That's when the room truly went silent. Even the kitchen noise seemed to pause. The chef stopped shouting orders. The dishwasher paused mid-rinse. Every eye in the dining room was locked on them, some wide with shock, others quickly looking away, pretending not to see. A young couple at the next table froze, forks halfway to their mouths. An older woman clutched her napkin tighter, her lips pressed into a thin line. Maria felt exposed, humiliated. Her cheeks burned. She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't, not here. Not in front of him. So she did the only thing she could. She stopped resisting and went still. Gregory mistook her stillness for surrender. There you go, he said, his voice softening back into that fake charm. That's better. Now let's just see never finish the sentence, because from the corner booth, a calm voice cut through the tension like a knife. I suggest you let her go now. Everyone turned. It was the quiet man in the gray suit, the one Maria had barely noticed earlier. He was standing now, tall and composed, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his posture and the way he held his ground that made the air feel heavier. Gregory blinked, confused. Who the hell are you? The man didn't flinch. Someone who's been watching and recording. He lifted his phone slightly, screen glowing. Maria hadn't seen him take it out, but now it was obvious he'd captured everything. Gregory's face flushed red. You can't record me. That's illegal. Actually, the man said evenly, in Illinois, as long as one party consents, which I do, it's perfectly legal. And I'm sure your employer would love to see how you treat service staff when you think no one's looking. So that hit Gregory like a bucket of ice water. His grip on Maria loosened instantly. He dropped her arm like it had burned him. This is ridiculous, he muttered, stepping back. She was being rude. You were assaulting her, the man interrupted, his voice still calm but now edged with steel. Grabbing someone against their will isn't just anything. It's a crime. Maria rubbed her wrist, her breath coming fast. She wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear. But she also felt something else, a flicker of relief, of being seen. Not as a waitress, not as part of the furniture, but as a person who mattered enough for someone to speak up. Gregory's friends finally stirred. One stood up, tugging at his sleeve. Come on, Greg, let's just go. But Gregory wasn't ready to back down. He turned to Maria, his eyes blazing. You're gonna regret this, he hissed. I'll make sure you never work in this city again. Before Maria could respond, the man in the gray suit stepped between them. Not aggressively, just firmly, like a wall appearing out of nowhere. Threatening her only makes it worse, he said. Leave now, or I call the police myself. For a long moment, Gregory just stared. Then, with a disgusted grunt, he snatched his coat from the back of his chair and stormed toward the door, his friends scrambling after him. The bell above the entrance jingled sharply as they left, the sound almost mocking in the sudden quiet. The restaurant exhaled. People started whispering. Someone clapped softly, then stopped when others didn't join in. A waiter hurried over to clean up the spilled wine. Maria stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to steady her breathing. Then the man turned to her. Up close, he looked younger than she'd thought, maybe mid-30s, with tired eyes and a quiet intensity. He didn't smile. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just looked at her and said, "Are you okay?" It was such a simple question. But no one had asked her that in years, not really. Not when it mattered. Maria swallowed hard. I think so." He nodded. "Good, but you shouldn't have to think so after doing your job." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "My name's Daniel. I'm not just a customer. I actually own a small stake in this place. Bought it last month to help keep it running. Mr. Rossi didn't tell anyone." Maria's eyes widened. You own part of the restaurant." "Quietly," he said. "But that means I have a say in how things are run." "And what just happened?" "That's not how things are run here. Not on my watch." Before she could respond, Mr. Rossi came rushing over, his face pale. "Maria, are you all right?" I heard. "I'm fine," she said quickly, not wanting to make a scene. But Daniel cut in. "She's not fine," he said gently, but firmly. "And neither is your policy of ignoring harassment to keep customers happy. That ends tonight." Mr. Rossi looked stunned. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd never seen this man before. Didn't recognize him as an investor, but something in Daniel's tone told him this wasn't a bluff. Daniel turned back to Maria. "Go sit down for a minute. Take a break. I'll handle this." She wanted to protest. She still had tables to serve, tips to earn, but her legs felt like jelly. So she nodded and walked slowly to the staff break room, her heart still pounding. Behind her, Daniel spoke to Mr. Rossi in low, serious tones. Then he walked to the front and asked the hostess to close the dining room early, just for 10 minutes. Let the staff breathe. As Maria sat on a worn-out couch in the back, sipping water someone had brought her, she replayed the moment in her head. The grab, the fear, the silence. And then, that voice, calm, certain, on her side. She didn't know who Daniel really was. She didn't know his name would soon be in headlines. She didn't know this night would change everything. All she knew was that for the first time in a long time, she hadn't been alone. Daniel Cho hadn't planned to eat at La Trattoria that night. He'd been on his way to a late meeting when his car got stuck in downtown Chicago traffic. Horns blaring, rain starting to slick the streets. Frustrated, he told his driver to pull over. "I'll walk," he said, and on a whim, drawn by the warm glow of the restaurant's windows and the smell of garlic and basil drifting onto the sidewalk, he stepped inside. He didn't want attention. He never did. Even though his name appeared on magazine covers and his tech company had reshaped how millions communicated, Daniel preferred invisibility. He wore no flashy watch, no designer logo, just a well-cut gray suit that looked expensive only if you knew what to look for. He asked for the quietest booth, ordered a glass of red wine and a simple pasta, and opened a folder of acquisition papers. He wasn't here to be seen. He was here to disappear for an hour, but then he saw her. Not in a romantic way, nothing like that. He noticed her the way you notice someone who moves with purpose in a room full of noise. She was the waitress with tired eyes but steady hands. The one who remembered how Mr. Patel liked his olives, who smiled gently at the elderly couple holding hands, who kept her head down but never her dignity. He watched her for maybe 30 seconds before returning to his work. Just another hard-working person in a city full of them. Then the group arrived. Loud. Laughing too hard, already halfway through their second round before they'd even sat down. Daniel recognized the type instantly mid-level executives celebrating a deal, full of borrowed confidence and expensive whiskey. He'd been in rooms like that once, early in his career, watching men like that take up space like it belonged to them. He'd learned to mimic their swagger just to survive. But he never forgot how it felt to be the one serving them. At first it was just glances. One of them in tall, slick-back hair, gold watch, kept watching the waitress as she moved. Then came the comments, low enough that only his table heard. But Daniel's hearing was sharp from years of listening in boardrooms where tone mattered more than words. He caught phrases like, "she's got fire" and "bet she's got a temper," said with smirks that made his stomach tighten. He glanced up again. The waitress Maria, though he didn't know her name yet, was polite, but distant. She took their order quickly, avoided lingering. Smart. She knew the game. But the man wasn't playing fair. Daniel saw the moment it shifted. Maria set down a tray of drinks. The man accidentally brushed her hand. She pulled back slightly but didn't react. Then, minutes later, he asked her something that made her shake her head and say, "I have a son at home." The man laughed like it was a joke. His friends joined in. But Maria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Daniel's pen stopped moving. He remembered being 19, washing dishes in a greasy diner in San Jose, his English still rough, his shoes falling apart. A customer had called him boy and thrown a napkin at his face. No one said a word. Not the manager. Not the other staff. He'd swallowed it because rent was due, and his little sister needed medicine. That silence had carved a hollow place in him, one he'd spent years trying to fill with success. With money, with control. Now watching Maria, that hollow place echoed. He didn't stand. Didn't intervene. Not yet. Because he knew better than most that stepping in too soon could make things worse. The man might double down. Maria might lose her job. So Daniel did the one thing he could. He prepared. Quietly, he pulled out his phone. Not to call anyone. Not yet. He opened the camera, switched to video, and angled it just enough to capture the table without being obvious. He didn't want to be a hero. He wanted to be proof. Then it happened. 1 second, Maria was clearing plates. The next, the man grabbed her wrist and yanked her toward him. Hard. Her tray clattered. Her body stiffened. Around the room, people froze, but no one moved. No one spoke. Just like all those years ago in that diner, Daniel's chest tightened. He saw the fear flash in Maria's eyes before she masked it. Saw the way she tried to pull free, polite even in panic. Saw the man lean in, smirking. Pulling her toward the kitchen like she was his to take. That's when Daniel made his choice. He didn't shout. Didn't storm over. He simply stood calm, deliberate, and said, "I suggest you let her go." Now, his voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Everyone turned. Even the kitchen noise seemed to pause. The man Gregory looked confused, then angry. "Who the hell are you?" Daniel didn't flinch. "Someone who's been watching and recording." He lifted his phone just enough to show the glowing screen. Gregory's face went pale. His grip loosened, but Daniel wasn't done. He stepped forward, not threateningly, but with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. "In Illinois, recording is legal if one party consents. That's me. And I'm sure your employer would love to see how you treat women when you think no one's looking." Gregory sputtered, tried to bluff, but the power had shifted. The room had witnesses. The phone had evidence. And this quiet man in the gray suit, he wasn't afraid. What Gregory didn't know, and what no one in the restaurant realized, was that Daniel Cho wasn't just a customer. Weeks earlier, he'd quietly bought a small stake in La Trattoria after learning the owner was struggling. He'd done it anonymously, not for profit, but because he remembered what it felt like to work in places that could vanish overnight. He'd never told anyone, not even Mr. Rossi. But now, that secret gave him leverage. As Gregory stumbled back, humiliated and furious, Daniel turned to Maria. Her eyes were wide, her breath shaky. He didn't offer empty comfort. He just looked at her and asked, "Are you okay?" And in that moment, something passed between them. Not pity, not charity, but recognition. Two people who'd known what it meant to be invisible, now seeing each other clearly. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this night wouldn't just change Maria's life. It would reignite something in him too, the belief that real power isn't in building empires, but in protecting people who are trying to build their own lives, one shift at a time. He stayed calm as he spoke to the manager. As he asked the dining room to close briefly, as he made sure Maria had space to breathe, he didn't seek thanks. He didn't want applause. He just made sure that this time, like all those years ago, someone had stepped in. And as he sat back down in his booth, phone still recording, papers forgotten, he knew one thing for certain. Some moments aren't about business. They're about being human. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The moment he stepped between Maria and Gregory, something shifted in the room, not just in the air, but in the unspoken rules that usually kept people silent. He stood there, calm and steady, like a tree that had weathered too many storms to be shaken by one more gust. Gregory, suddenly aware that his power had vanished the second someone refused to look away, stumbled backward, muttering curses under his breath as his friends dragged him out the door. But Daniel wasn't done. He turned to Mr. Rossi, the restaurant manager who stood frozen near the host stand, his face pale and sweaty. "Close the dining room," Daniel said, not as a request, but as a quiet command. "Just for 10 minutes. Let your staff catch their breath." Mr. Rossi blinked. "Close it." "But we're packed." "Do it," Daniel said, his tone firm but not unkind. What just happened wasn't just bad manners. It was dangerous. And your team needs a moment to feel safe again. Reluctantly, Mr. Rossi nodded. Within minutes, soft apologies were murmured to confused diners. Candles were gently blown out at emptying tables, and the front doors were locked. The sudden quiet was almost eerie after the chaos. Waiters and busboys stood in small groups, whispering, glancing toward the break room where Maria had disappeared. No one knew what to do. This wasn't in the employee handbook. Daniel walked straight to the kitchen, where 2 security guards dressed in plain clothes but unmistakably alert waited near the back exit. They'd been stationed outside all evening, part of Daniel's usual low-profile protocol. He gave them a quick nod. "He's gone, but keep an eye out. If he tries to come back, call the police immediately." Then he turned and walked toward the break room. Maria sat on the old couch, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup of water. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were red and her shoulders were hunched, like she was trying to make herself smaller. When Daniel entered, she looked up, startled. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't cause anything," Daniel replied, sitting across from her not too close, giving her space. "He did. And you handled it with more grace than most people would." She looked down at her hands. I didn't know what to do. Everyone was watching, but no one moved." "I know," he said softly. "That's the worst part. Not the grab. Not even the words. It's the silence afterward. Like you're invisible." Maria looked up, surprised. You've been through something like this." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Years ago, I was washing dishes in a diner in San Jose. A customer didn't like that I looked at him wrong. He shoved me into the freezer and locked the door for 10 minutes. Staff heard me banging, but no one came. They were scared of losing their jobs." Maria's eyes widened. "I didn't know." "Most people don't," he said. "But that's why I couldn't stay quiet tonight. Because someone should have spoken up for me back then. And tonight, I could." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, plain white, no logo, just a name and a phone number. "This is my personal line. Not my assistant's, not a receptionist. Me. If that man contacts you, threatens you, shows up anywhere near your home or your son's school, you call me. Day or night." Maria took the card slowly, as if it might burn her fingers. "Why are you doing this?" "Because it's the right thing," he said simply. "And because you deserve to work without fear." He paused, then added, "I also want to offer you something else. Legal support, full coverage, no cost. A lawyer who specializes in workplace harassment. And if you're interested, I'll pay for self-defense classes. Not because you did anything wrong, but because everyone should feel strong in their own skin." Maria stared at him, tears finally spilling over. Not from sadness this time, but from relief, the kind that comes when someone sees your pain and doesn't look away. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one's ever offered me help like this, and it's long overdue," he said. Outside, the restaurant slowly reopened. Customers returned to their tables, unaware of the storm that had passed through. But inside the staff, something had changed. The busboy who'd frozen earlier now stood taller. The hostess, who'd avoided eye contact during the incident, brought Maria a fresh cup of tea without being asked. Even Mr. Rossi approached, awkward but sincere. "Maria, I'm sorry I didn't step in. "I won't let that happen again," she nodded, accepting his apology without words. She knew he meant it Tevin if fear had won the first time. Later that night, after her shift ended, Maria walked to the bus stop with her head higher than usual. The city lights shimmered on wet pavement, and the wind had softened. She clutched Daniel's card in her coat pocket like a talisman. She didn't know it yet. Gregory Vance wouldn't just walk away. Embarrassed and furious, he'd call his company the next morning, spinning a story about unprofessional staff and false accusations. But by then, Daniel had already sent the video to Vance's CEO along with a note, **. Your employee assaulted a single mother in front of witnesses. I suggest you act before I go public. **. Within 48 hours, Vance was fired. Not quietly, but publicly. The company issued a statement condemning harassment and pledged to retrain all staff. News outlets picked up the story not because of Daniel's name. He kept his involvement private. But because of Maria's courage. A local reporter tracked her down, and though she declined to be named, her account shared anonymously sparked a citywide conversation about the treatment of service workers. Daniel kept his promises. A lawyer met with Maria the following week, explaining her rights and filing a formal report with the city's labor board. Self-defense classes began the next month, twice a week, paid for in full. With a babysitter arranged for Mateo, at first, Maria felt awkward, like she didn't belong in a room full of confident women. But with each session, she stood straighter. She learned how to shout no, without flinching, how to break a grip, how to trust her own strength. And Daniel? He didn't disappear after that night. He came back to La Trattoria once a week, not as an owner, but as a regular. He always sat in the same corner booth, always ordered the same pasta, and always left a generous tip with a note for Mateo's college fund. But the real change came months later. One afternoon, Maria received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a check enough to cover 6 months' rent and a simple message, *, you've got a dream. Let it grow. *, she didn't know it then, but Daniel had been quietly researching her. He'd learned about her love for baking. She often brought homemade cookies for the staff. Her dream of opening a small cafe where workers were treated with respect, and her fear that she'd never have the chance. So he made one, not as a handout, not as charity, but as an investment tinner. When she finally worked up the courage to call him, voice trembling, he answered on the first ring. "I believe in you," he said. "Now go build something kind." And she did. But that was later. On that night, after the kitchen, after the silence broke, after a billionaire chose to see a waitress not as invisible, but as human, Maria walked home under the Chicago stars, her son's drawing of a rocket ship tucked in her bag, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, good things could happen to people like her, not because she was lucky, but because someone finally stood up and made space for her to stand too. Months passed, and the night at La Trattoria didn't fade like most restaurant dramas do. It stuck like a song you can't stop humming, or a lesson you can't unlearn. For Maria, it became the turning point she never saw coming. She didn't wake up the next morning a hero or a millionaire, but something quieter and more powerful happened. She began to believe she mattered not just as a worker, but as a person with dreams worth protecting. Gregory Vance's firing made headlines in business circles. At first, he tried to fight back, claiming the video was edited, that Maria had led him on. But the truth had weight. Witnesses came forward to their waitstaff, even a customer who'd recorded part of the scene on her phone. The company, fearing a public relations disaster, cut ties fast. Within weeks, Vance disappeared from LinkedIn. His name became a cautionary tale in corporate training sessions. This is what happens when you confuse power with permission. But the real ripple started with Maria. She kept working at La Trattoria, but differently now. She no longer swallowed every rude comment or forced a smile through discomfort. When a customer snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog, she calmly said, "I'll be right with you when you're ready to speak respectfully." And if they complained, Mr. Rossi backed her up every time. The whole staff stood taller. Tips didn't drop. They rose. People noticed. Regulars started asking for Maria by name, not because she flirted or laughed too loud, but because she treated them with quiet dignity and expected the same in return. Then came the self-defense classes. At first, she went only because Daniel had offered, and she didn't want to seem ungrateful. But soon she looked forward to them. Twice a week, after dropping Mateo at a neighbor's, she'd walk into that small gym with its padded floors and mirrors. And for an hour, she wasn't a waitress or a single mom. She was strong. She learned to pivot, to shout, to trust her instincts. One evening, during a drill, her instructor said, "Fear is real, but it doesn't have to be the boss." Maria repeated that line in her head for days. Mateo noticed the change too. "Mama, you walk like a superhero now," he said one morning, watching her zip up her coat with new confidence. She laughed, but inside, she felt it like a door had opened inside her chest. Letting in light she didn't know was missing. Meanwhile, Daniel kept his distance not out of coldness, but respect. He didn't swoop in as a savior. He didn't demand gratitude. He simply showed up, paid his bill, and left notes that never said "you owe me," but always said, "Keep going." Then, one rainy afternoon, he asked to speak with her after her shift. They sat at a quiet table near the back. No cameras, no audience. Just two people who'd been changed by a single moment. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what you told me once, that you used to bake with your abuela, and you always dreamed of opening a little cafe. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." Maria's breath caught. She hadn't mentioned that in months. She'd tucked the dream away, thinking it was childish. "I've found a space," he said gently. "On Maple Street. Small, but full of light. The rent's reasonable. And I'd like to help you open it, not as a handout, but as a partner. You run it. You name it. You hire the team. I just believe in the idea of it." Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't look away. "Why me?" "Because the world has enough fancy places run by people who've never washed a dish," he said. "But it needs more places built by people who know what it feels like to be unseen and choose to see others anyway." She said yes. The cafe opened 8 months later. She called it Mateo's Corner, not just for her son, but for every kid who deserved to see their parent proud, safe, and whole. The walls were painted soft yellow. The counter was low enough for children to see over. The staff, all paid fairly, all trained in respect, all given breaks without guilt. There was a little reading nook with books in English and Spanish. And every Friday, Maria baked her abuela's cinnamon rolls, warm, sweet, and shared freely with anyone having a hard day. News of the cafe spread, not through ads, but through word of mouth. Teachers came after school. Nurses stopped by between shifts. Retirees lingered over coffee, saying it felt like home. Slowly, Mateo's Corner became more than a business. It became a promise that kindness could be a business model. Daniel never took credit. He sat in the back sometimes, sipping black coffee, watching Maria move through her cafe like she belonged, which, of course, she did. He never asked for returns on his investment. He only asked one thing, that she'll pay it forward. When she could, and she did, she started hosting free workshops for service workers: how to handle harassment, how to know your rights, how to find your voice. She partnered with local shelters, offering job training for women rebuilding their lives. She even hired a young dishwasher who'd been sleeping in his car, just like Daniel once had. As for Daniel, now that night changed him too. He'd spent years building companies, making deals, climbing lists. But standing in that restaurant, watching Maria's fear turn to strength, he realized something. Real power isn't in wealth or influence. It's in choosing to use what you have to lift someone else up. Inspired by Maria's resilience, he quietly launched the Frontline Foundation, a nonprofit that supports waitstaff, cleaners, delivery drivers, and other overlooked workers facing abuse or injustice. No press tours. No gala dinners. Just direct aid. Legal help, emergency housing, mental health support. The Foundation's motto? Dignity isn't earned. It's owed. Years later, on a crisp October evening much like the one that started it all, Maria stood outside Mateo's corner, locking up after a long day. Mateo, now 10, waited beside her, holding 2 hot chocolates. "You did good today, Mama," he said, handing her one. She smiled, ruffling his hair. "We both did." Across the street, a man in a gray coat watched for a moment, then turned and walked away unseen, unnoticed, just how he liked it. But Maria saw him, and she nodded, just once, in silent thanks. They never spoke publicly about that night. They didn't need to. The proof was in the cafe's warm light, in the confidence of its staff, in the way customers treated each other with patience, with care, with humanity. Because sometimes, the biggest changes don't start with speeches or protests. They start with a grab in a crowded restaurant, and a voice that says, "No, not here, not her." And from that single no, 1,000 yeses grow yes to safety, yes to respect, yes to dreams that were once too heavy to carry alone. Maria never became famous. Daniel never sought praise. But together, without ever planning to, they built something rare, a world where dignity wasn't reserved for the powerful but protected for everyone, one quiet act at a time.